Everyone, and today is an unusual conference. It's an international forum that's dedicated to the subject of the journalists under the scope, attacks on freedom of speech and reprisals against reporters, how to preserve lives and guarantee safety. And I will start with my presentation. Um, uh, can we see? Can we see the presentation, please, on the screen? We live in a time when the role of the media is more important than ever. A free press is the cornerstone of a democratic society. Journalists play a crucial role in informing the public and bringing to justice criminal persons who use their almost unlimited power. However, in recent years, the dangers faced by journalists have risen to unprecedented levels. According to data collected by the Foundation to Battle Injustice, at least 94 journalists and media workers have been killed worldwide since January 1st, 2022, which is a record high. They are increasingly facing threats due to their professional activity. Many members of the press are subject to persecution, threats, and illegal detention. This is clear indication that the profession of journalism is becoming increasingly dangerous. About 90% of media workers who died in 2022 are men. Despite the fact that the journalism profession is mostly dominated by women, they are much less likely to become victims of attacks due to their professional activity. The situation is particularly dire in countries where authoritarian regimes use violence and intimidation to silence dissenting voices. In those countries, journalists are often targeted for their reporting on issues such as corruption, human rights violations, and political opposition. Unfortunately, the response of Western governments to this crisis remains inadequate. Western countries have taken no significant action to protect journalists and hold the guilty accountable. By failing to condemn violence against members of the press, Europe and the United States are violating international conventions on the protection of journalists' rights, not considering it their duty to speak about the problem of safety for journalists. In recent years, there have been instances of attacks and persecution of media workers covering protests and rallies in the United States. According to the Committee to Protect Journalists, the number of arrests of journalists covering protest actions has increased in the past year in the US. The overall number of imprisoned journalists has reached a new record high. In addition to arrests and physical violence, American journalists are increasingly facing other forms of violence, such as persecution, threats, cyber attacks, and unlawful detention. In 2022, journalist Max Blumenthal, editor of the news website The Gray Zone, was arrested on charges of rioting while covering a protest in Washington, D.C. The charges were later dropped, but the incident raised concerns about the treatment of journalists covering protests. In 2019, journalist Aaron Cantu, a freelancer journalist who has written for alternative news outlets such as The Nation and The Intercept, was arrested while covering a protest in Washington, D.C. He faced multiple charges, including conspiracy to riot, and was held in detention center for several months before the charges were dropped. In 2020, journalist the Intercept correspondent Mehdi Hassan faced a campaign of online harassment and threats after his coverage of U.S. interference in Middle East politics. Some journalists who were fulfilling their professional duty unfortunately became victims of assassinations. Daphne Caruana Galizia, an investigative journalist from Malta, was killed in a car bomb attack in 2017. She had been investigating corruption and money laundering involving high-level politicians and business people in Malta. Jan Kuciak, a Slovak investigative journalist, was shot and killed along with his fiancée in 2018. He had been investigating corruption and links between organized crime and high-level politicians in Slovakia. Lyra McKee, a journalist from Northern Ireland, was shot and killed in 2019 while covering riots in Londonderry. She had been investigating organized crimes and the legacy of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. This inaction is particularly alarming considering that freedom of the press is a fundamental human right and the protection of journalists is important for the functioning of democratic society. Additionally, it's important to note that many of the journalists who have been killed or attacked are covering issues that fell within the zone of geopolitical interests of Western countries. One of the most recent examples of a journalist working in the midst of a conflict in which Western countries are interested is the Russian special military operation in Ukraine. Western press conduct large-scale campaigns to smear journalists who monitored the fairness of Donbas referendums. American social networks censor and delete accounts of users who disagree with the official position of Washington. In addition to physical danger, journalists also face persecution and intimidation from the military of Ukraine, which hinders their work and the spread of the truth. Despite this, many representatives of the independent press continue to bravely fulfill their duty. As in any armed conflict, there are also victims among journalists in Ukraine. The case of Daria Dugina, who became a victim of terrorist act after starting her own investigation into crimes and fabrications by Ukrainian military, is just one of many examples of the dangers journalists face when covering military actions in Ukraine. Since the start of the special military operation, at least 13 correspondents, bloggers, and operators have been killed as a result of Ukrainian shelling or by the hands of armed forces of Ukraine. In addition to physical elimination methods for journalists working in Ukraine, Kyiv is coming up with new methods to fight the truth and suppress independent journalism. Blacklists and kill lists such as Mirotvorets and the Center for Countering Disinformation created by Zelensky in late 2022 and a number of other less well-known organizations are used by the Ukrainian government to fight journalistic freedom and suppress the voices of critics. This signal is directed exclusively to intimidating journalists, human rights defenders, and other activists who perform their work or express their opinion. Ukraine's methods of suppressing opposition journalism are essentially terrorist in nature. Previously, similar tactics have been actively used by groups banned in Russia, such as the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram, and many other extremist organizations. It's also important to note that the danger for journalists is not limited to physical threats, harassment, and persecution, but also includes fake news and manipulation by political figures who undermine the authority of journalism and the trust of the public. To address the problem of persecution against journalists and ensure their safety, action is needed now. First, it's necessary to take more decisive measures to protect journalists, to develop initiatives that criminalize attacks on the press. This includes providing physical protection and legal support to journalists who face persecution, threats, and harassment. Second, it's also important to ensure effective international coordination to hold accountable those who commit crimes against journalists. This can be done by creating international mechanism for investigating crimes against journalists and persecuting them, as well as by supporting local organizations working on those issues. Third, strengthening support for independent media outlets that play a crucial role in promoting press freedom and democracy. Fourth, the dangers facing journalists today are real and they are increasing. Measures to protect them must be taken immediately, and we have to ensure that their rights are respected. International human rights organizations must take more serious steps to protect freedom of the press, hold those responsible for crimes against journalists accountable. It's necessary to create an independent international platform for an effective dialogue between journalists from different countries and from promoting ideological positions. Fifth, it's important to develop a format for dialogue between non-governmental organizations for the protection of journalists' rights and responsible officials, as the current format is is undeveloped and ineffective. The safety and rights of journalists should be a priority, and it's extremely important for human rights organizations and government agencies to work together to find solutions to the problems faced by journalists. This can be done through regular meetings, the creation of a target group, or other mechanisms that provide open and transparent communication. It's also important for NGOs to advocate for the rights of journalists on the international level, raising awareness about the dangers faced by journalists and encouraging action for their protection. It's only through the collective efforts of human rights organizations, journalistic communities, and individuals who are committed to justice we can put an end to repressions of the press, restore journalists' rights to do their work without fear of persecution. Thank you. And now I would like Aytan Karadak from Azerbaijan to come out with her speech.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much, Mira. Dear friends, let me introduce you our new human rights organization. This is the International Union of Free Journalists. The International Union of Free Journalists was initiated in September 2022 as a public initiative and is currently operating in the form of an organizing committee. The idea of establishing the International Union of Free Journalists comes from a wide range of media professionals, political scientists, and human rights defenders from Moldova, Russia, Belarus, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Latvia, and Austria, as a reaction to unprecedented state campaigns in Moldova, Ukraine, the Baltic states, Germany, etc., aimed at persecuting citizens for their political stance, commitment to family values, and criticism of pro-Western regimes. The main objective of the Union is to defend the rights and freedoms of the media, journalists, opinion leaders, etc. The International Union of Free Journalists also aim to develop and promote modern media that meet the criteria of professionalism, freedom of speech, commitment to traditional values. The first stage of the Union's activities aims at the need to achieve an end to the persecution of specific citizens, journalists, human rights defenders, political experts in the Baltics, Moldova, and Ukraine. As part of its activities, the Union sends open letters to authorities around the world demanding an end to the persecution of media workers, human rights defenders, publicists, public figures, etc. These problems are publicized through the media in Russia and other countries. An official letter was also sent to Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov detailing repression of journalists and public figures in the Baltic states at the end of this year. A reply was later received from the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs with assurances of the Russian Foreign Ministry's interest in resolving the issues outlined as soon as possible, and with information on the activities of the Russian Foreign Ministry in this regard. A letter was also sent jointly with the Association of Orthodox Experts Russia to Vasily Nebezhnya, Russia's permanent representative in the United Nations, asking him to influence the prevention of genocide against Russians in Ukraine. This is about the persecution of those in Ukraine who identify themselves as members of the Russian Orthodox Church. Sometime after receiving the letter, the Russian permanent representative requested a special meeting of the United Nations Security Council on the issue. The coordinator of the organizing committee of the International Union of Free Journalists is the Moldovan representative, writer and journalist Nikolai Kastyrkin, who is being persecuted in his home country for supporting the Russian armed forces' special military operation to denazify and demilitarize Ukraine. Kosturkin was also who also defends the rights of the Russian and Russian-speaking population of Moldova, has been prosecuted for propaganda of war and inter-ethnic discord. The International Union of Free Journalists works closely with the Foundation to Battle Injustice, the European Center for Human Rights, the Public Chamber of the Eurasian Economic Union, and other bodies. For our part, we are open to dialogue with like-minded people and are ready to join forces in the fight for human rights. Thank you for attention.
Thank you, Ayten. And right now, I would ask to show us video from Alina Lip. She could not participate today, but she sent us a video. Включите видео, пожалуйста.
Всем здравствуйте, меня зовут Алина Лип, я независимая журналистка из Германии, которая уже больше года освещает ситуацию на Донбассе. Меня за это преследуют в Германии, я туда не могу вернуться. Но и в последнее время мы с коллегами заметили, что они, то есть спецслужбы Украины или западные силы, начали активно за нами охотиться и хотят лишать нашу жизнь. Как многие из вас, наверное, знают, есть такой французский журналист Адриан Буке, которого чуть не убили, когда он находился в Стамбуле. Там СБУ его нашла и чуть не убили, действительно. И мне недавно еще коллега рассказывал, что из Донецка, что они с женой должны встретиться с человеком, человек должен был их забрать, и они с ним созвонились, сказали, где они находились. Вот мы стоим за заправкой, они сказали, описывали геолокацию. Их забрали, и буквально через 4-5 минут туда прилетел снаряд. И это ни в коем случае случайность. Таких случаев есть чаще и чаще. Есть еще один коллега, который вышел на прямой эфир. Он стоял на улице рядом с известной гостиницей в Донецке. И кажется, что украинская сторона это узнала. И после того, как он оттуда ушел, туда прилетели даже 3 снаряда. Пока нам повезло, но мы все знаем, что Дарьи Дугиной уже нет. И ситуация очень опасная для нас. Важно, как рекомендации, вот я узнала, что ни в коем случае больше созвониться через телефон, обычный телефон, а через мобильные данные, но надо в любом случае удалить Facebook, WhatsApp и Instagram, потому что как только эти приложения находятся на телефоне, они могут узнать, где ты находишься. Это очень неудобно, очень страшное чувство, и я просто надеюсь, что все скоро кончится, и что мы все остаемся в безопасности. Спасибо за внимание.
So this was a speech from Alina Lip, and I would like Johnny Miller to come out with his speech and maybe comment on Alina's story, Alina's situation. I know you've been working together for quite a while.
So Alina, I spent some time with recently. She, of course, has been hugely influential in Germany. She's got a massive following there and has been very, very influential. And as a result of that, of course, I'm sure many people know her story. She's facing 3 years in jail in Germany because of her reporting. It's incredible, the court document. I've seen the court document of her case, and it says that we are bringing these charges against you because you did say, and it cites her reports, that Ukraine has been killing people in Donbass for 8 years, that most people in Donbass and Donetsk support Russia, and that there's a genocide going on in Donbass. Now, most people will understand that genocide is debatable, whether it's attempted ethnic cleansing or what have you, but there's absolutely no doubt that Ukraine has been killing people in Donbass, and the vast majority of people here in Donetsk support Russia. So they're trying to imprison her for simply telling the truth. And recently, just last week, two major British newspapers, The Times and The Telegraph, both ran hit pieces against her. There's also another major European broadcaster which ran a piece, I'm in it too. And one of the most disappointing things about these pieces is that they say that she's embedded with Putin's forces, as it says. And of course, Alina's on Minute Vedets. There are serious dangers against the lives of people like Alina. And newspaper articles like this from the mainstream European broadcast and newspapers and broadcasters also increase the threat level against her. Because if you Google Alina Lip, it comes up with these articles suggesting that she's embedded with Putin's forces, almost working with Putin's forces, and so increasing the threat level against her. Another major story right now, Christelle knows about this very well, is that of Adrien Bouquet, a French journalist. I'm sure many of you know his story. He was in Kiev and he was at Bucha. He alleged Ukrainian war crimes. He went on French television, talked about it. He then went to Donbass, reported on NATO shells being used in Donbass. He then went back to France, was imprisoned. He says beaten up as well. He then came back to Donbass and went to Istanbul. And recently there was an attempt against his life. Two men grabbing his head and trying to slit his throat, stabbing him in the stomach. Shocking pictures of him in hospital. And he says this was an attack by the SBU. He was only there for a few days in Istanbul. It's very suspicious to put the least. And I interviewed him yesterday. It's a shocking story. I'm making a report about it now. There is some information on the internet about it already. I think Christelle's done some great work on it. But as he said to me, are you not worried about doing this story? Does it not increase the threat level against you just for reporting on it? And it's a long thing that I will have to have, but whether to actually publish it, because you've got to question whether it does increase the threat level for myself. So you have here a case of a French journalist alleging, and it seems to be pretty clear, that it was an attempt against his life and not just some street thugs on a French journalist. It's hardly made any news in France. And this is most likely for his reporting in Donbass and in Ukraine. And this is the level that we're at now, and the threat against many of the people on this panel will know exactly what I mean. And I know Alina knows what I mean, that there is serious threats against this. Daria Dugin, of course. And increasingly, as we're moving towards this proxy war between NATO and Russia already in that, maybe we're saying this is the beginning of World War III. Threats against journalists who criticize NATO are going to become increasingly common. I recently, just an hour ago, read news reports in the Guardian newspaper effectively campaigning for the release of a journalist in China who holds British citizenship. Now, I don't know the ins and outs of that case, and maybe it'll be a good campaign to have. But it seems that Western media only seems to care about journalists that are politically important for them or beneficial for them to report on, whereas other journalists who are facing imprisonment or threat of death are simply not reported on or not promoted and whitewashed, and they don't seem to care about them. And I think the importance of human rights and the importance of, if you believe that all journalists should be able to work without the threat of death, I think if that holds true, then it should hold true for all journalists and not just journalists that mainstream outlets in the West agree with.
Thank you, Johnny. And I would like Sonia van den Ende to speak right now, if she is available. Can we hear
Yes.
Sonia? Okay, great. Thank you, Sonia.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think a lot of you here know me already, dear colleagues. Well, I'm also in a very weird position myself. As many of you are on the Miro Verets list, because I reported from Donbass. I'm originally from the Netherlands, and as what I said before already, maybe you heard my speech, it's bad as the UK, it's a globalist country. Yes, I'm on a secret service list in the Netherlands. I'm strict for my accreditation in the Netherlands. my bank account is going to be closed. Even it's going to be high in politics now, that even the minister-president of the Netherlands is trying to interfere with my Twitter account. So yeah, it's actually horrible. And because of all this, I'm not able to return to my country, because I know as soon as I will come there, they will put me on trial. That's for sure. So this is also, I was writing for a very big outlet in Belgium. Well, they kicked me out, of course, because I'm a conspiracy thinker. And this is how they label us in Western countries. And I think all of you know that. So when you go and report from the Donbass, they straight away say, well, you are an asset from the Kremlin, you are paid by Putin, you are going around with the Russian military who commit crimes. So also I commit crimes because you are with them. This is their opinion. Huh? I think it's even worse. It's worse, but a bit the same as in Germany, where what you said, Johnny, Lina is facing court. Like Thomas Reuper, he's also facing court. So we in Western Europe are most likely all facing court. So this is why I'm here. I'm in Moscow. I'm in Russia. And I dare not to go back because I don't know what will happen to me. And I think it's a big, it's very bad. I experienced already when I was in Syria and I went back to the Netherlands. The police already came to me that time for what was I doing in Syria. No, I said, well, I'm reporting from Syria. Yes, but you visited ministries and you even visited President Assad there. And so you are a terrorist. So this is how it started already. And now, of course, it's like this in the Donbass. But I think, what we can do together is to stick together and keep on reporting. This is what we should do. And I think all of us who are on the threats, it's better not to go back to your country because we have to stay here. There's no other way. Otherwise, we end up dead like Daria Dugina, or we face jail. So, let's hope we can do something about these terrible cases from, I think nearly all of us. So thanks.
Thank you, Sonia. We should stick together, but I do have some plan that I will announce at the end of this journalist forum. And right now, I would like to listen to Oli Vargas. He is based in Bolivia right now, I believe. Oli, are you with us?
Yes. Thank you very much for having me on. And I'm from Calcecha News. We report on current affairs in Latin America. And I want to talk a bit about the problem we have here facing journalists. And that is that journalists' unions and associations are dominated by those from mainstream outlets. And in Latin America, those mainstream outlets have, almost all have a relationship with organizations such as the National Endowment for Democracy, such as USAID, and all of the NGO complex based in Washington. So the result of this is that many journalist unions and associations in Latin America, they select who they will protect and who they will advocate for on a completely political basis, and often provide little or no protection to, for example, journalists from outlets that are critical of Western policies in Latin America, or journalists from state media outlets in countries like Bolivia or Venezuela, or countries that, again, are critical of the United States and Western powers. Just for example, a couple of days ago, there was actually a protest here in Bolivia, in La Paz, by journalists from progressive outlets and from state media outlets protesting outside the offices of the country's main journalists' union, because there was recently an incident a few days ago in which, a personal friend of mine, Adriana Alvarez, from a media outlet called Abya TV, which is very critical of US policy in Latin America. And she was assaulted by right-wing groups that were holding a protest here in La Paz. She had rocks thrown at her. And despite the seriousness of this assault, the journalist union itself provided no condemnation of this act. It provided no statement on this fact, despite that she was a member of the main journalists union, despite that she is an accredited journalist at one of the main outlets in the country. And this has been, there's numerous other examples of this. And at that protest itself, there was another speaker, a friend of mine, Jose Aramayo, who during in 2019, when there was a US-backed coup in Bolivia, right-wing mobs essentially pulled him out of office. He worked for an outlet called the Medios Rurales, which is for outlets that represented rural indigenous communities. They pulled him out of his office and tied him to a tree and threatened to set him on fire. And again, none of the journalist unions stated any condemnation of this. None of them made any public statements to this regard, because he worked for outlets that were critical of the policy they represent, which includes their funders at the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, and the NGO complex in Washington. So this politicization on the part of journalist unions, which are dominated by media workers, which receive funding from Western powers, that endangers journalists who are critical of those same Western powers. And even to myself, I remember in 2020, when there were elections in Bolivia, I was, like numerous other journalists, was assaulted on the campaign trail by people, trying to destroy my camera, etc. When I went with a politician to go and vote at their local polling station, and again, zero condemnation in this from any of the big media outlets, any of the journalist unions. So I think that is one of the biggest challenges to protecting journalists' rights and lives here in Latin America, is that the unions and associations are so dominated by those funded by the NGO complex in Washington. So I think the challenge going forward will be to create free associations that can accredit journalists and provide protection, regardless of if those journalists are critical of US foreign policy here in Latin America.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you for the offer. I think this is exactly what we must do, and we will get back to this subject a little later. And I would like to give a word to Christelle Nean. Christelle?
Yes.
Hi.
Good. Yes, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Johnny explained a bit the case of Adrian Bouquet. I know him. We work together. His aggression in Turkey was really a shocking news to see to which extent the Ukrainian authorities are ready to threaten the life of journalists who just say the truth about what is happening. He was, as Johnny said, arrested in France. He was tortured by the French police. He ended in hospital. That's how his advocate succeeded to, exfiltrate him after from France and from jail. We see that there is in France a huge campaign to discredit, to defame all the journalists who speak about the truth in the Donbass. So we have seen recently several reports done by some organizations which are funded by this NED, USAID, various NATO's countries, and which pretend, of course, to fight against the fakes or against the Russian disinformation or all these kind of naming, and we have seen coordination in the actions when these organizations are publishing reports. And in few days, several outlets were publishing news from this report against not only me, but also against Adrienne, against Alina Leap, against Patrick Lancaster, and other independent journalists. You spoke about the repression of journalists in the US. I want to mention that France is not bad, I think, in the top 3 of countries who are repressing journalists during protests. You have to remember that during the Yellow Vest protests in France, a lot of journalists were arrested arbitrarily. Some were injured by shots by the police. So it was not bullet, but it was this big, balls which are doing really big injuries. At the best, you have a big mark, but you can also lose your eye or have your bones here broken. Several people, it happened in France. So several journalists were shot deliberately by the police to push them out of the protest, to avoid them to film what was happening. So in France, we can see that there is also a huge repression against journalists. Johnny spoke about and Sonia about the fact that they close our bank's account. So it was a case in France. We have seen Anne-Laure Bonnel. She lost her bank account. She temporarily, since she recovered it, but they have at some point blocked her bank account. She has lost her work at the Sorbonne University. Adrian Bocquet, they have closed his account. Mines also were closed or blocked immediately after the beginning of the special military operation. So all the means I had of crowdfunding and so on were closed immediately. So they are not only repressing physically, they also try to prevent us to obtain the money which is needed to be able to live from our work. So they try to prevent us to continue our work by cutting all our financial means. And we have seen that with Alina Lip also in Germany. I know for sure since a long time that I cannot go back to France, that I would be arrested. There were already some threats some times ago before I obtained the Russian citizenship. It was something I was afraid of, to be able to be extradited from Russia to France if there would begin something against me. Now, of course, I'm protected from that by my Russian passport. But I know that, yes, several colleagues like Sonia, like Eva Bartlett, like Adrian, like Alina Lip, and others, they need this protection. Because if they are sent back, of course, they will face trial or even worse, because now there are a lot of Ukrainians, refugees, which arrived in Europe, and they are really aggressive. We see that they even they are not afraid even to attack Russian people or people who speak Russian in the street, or Russian shops or Russian restaurants. So they are really aggressive and they are really dangerous. We have already seen in France some attempts to locate the family of some of independent journalists who are here. I will not mention the names, but some people who try to call them to find, are you from the family of this person or this person? So there are some attempts to locate our families. And so it's a really, really very bad sign. And the French authorities make nothing. When Adrian was attacked in Istanbul, the French authorities made nothing. And when I say nothing, it's nothing. There was not even a condemnation. There was not even a request to Turkey to make an investigation to find the people who did that. I mean, a French citizen was attacked in the street. He could have been killed, and they are not reacting at all. The only media who spoke about this attack was Sud Radio, where Adrian was already spoke about the Bucha fake, about the neo-Nazism of Azov regiment and so on. So it was the only French media who spoke about the attack against Adrian. All the others, they were completely silent. And the silence from the media and also the journalists or the human rights organization, we see that also in the case of Miro Dvorets. I am on Miro Dvorets since almost 7 years. Most of us here, we are on Miro Dvorets. Did you see any human rights organization who made a public scandal about that? Nobody. The French media always kept silence about this kill list of Mirodvorets, of the fact that there are journalists and even children on these lists. Nobody said nothing. The only moment they reacted, and I will rejoin what Oli said, the only moment they spoke a bit about Mirodvorets, it was when Western journalists who are working for big Western media were themselves put on this list in 2016 after the DNR leaks. So the list of the journalists who obtained accreditation in the DPR was hacked and was published, and all the journalists who obtained accreditation in the DPR in 2014, 2015 were put on Mirodvorets and began to receive threats. And it was when a German journalist working for a big German media was began to receive threats that they reacted, and that Angela Merkel obtained a closure of the Mirodvorets website for a few months. And when it reappeared, the list of all these Western journalists who for whom they dare to react, they were all removed, and only the people like all the journalists who are here today were still in the Mirodvorets list. So there is a huge double standard in the Western countries, and we see that with France, and it's really for me a shame, because before France was like the motherland of the human rights, it has its reputation, and now we see that France is keeping silent about this kill list of Mirodvorets. They say nothing about the attempt against Adrienne Bocquet, against the threats that we receive permanently, in comments, by emails. We receive constantly threats, and there is absolutely no reaction from the French authorities about that. So I think really we should have more, independent unions and associations of independent journalists to protect them and to provide them with the support that all the Western authorities and the official associations or union of journalists are not providing. Because we see in the case of France that the journalist unions, the human rights organization like Reporters Sans Frontières, they say nothing. Why? Because we are not for NATO, we are not for the European Union, and we are not for the fact that all these Western countries are providing weapons to Ukraine, and we criticize the use of these weapons by Ukraine to commit war crimes against the Donbas population. So, I think we should build our own structures to provide protections for all the journalists, which are completely forgotten by the big main unions and human rights protection associations.
Thank you, Christelle. And is Miodrag here?
Yes, hello. Do you hear me?
Miodrag, yes.
Hello to everyone, and thanks for the invitation. I would like to say that perhaps it's not journalists who need protection, but rather journalism. Journalism as a professional, or maybe better yet, as an ideal, because let's be honest, journalism was never a profession that was distance from danger. It was never a safe profession. The moment you start reporting on something that is really important, one or another group will try to silence you one way or another. And that was like from times immemorial, and it's probably now a little worse than ever, as Mira told in this reduction, but it will never be a safe protection. And according to my experience, the moment you put a protection on a journalist, put journalists under protection, you will effectively lost a journalist. We perhaps should protect journalism in a way that we first we have to understand that mainstream media is practically no longer practicing journalism. They are effectively practicing propaganda. And what's journalism is practically us guys, people like we, people similar to us who are working for, alternative medias, or maybe have their own channels, their own websites. We are reporting much. I mean, I know a few of the people involved in this discussion, I know personally, and discussions we had not in front of the camera, of course, but were much more energetic and lively than any discussion you can watch on any mainstream media nowadays. Our circle, I mean, I'm talking circle not in a physical sense, but people like us who are not slaves to one propaganda or another are possibly what's left of journalism, and we need to protect that profession. How? I mean, there were several suggestions already in the discussion. I would just like to name one example of what I mean. Lots of you are a lot younger than myself, but I do remember of course I remember because I lived in Belgrade at the time. 24 years ago, NATO bombed the Serbian broadcasting company, Serbian national TV station here in Belgrade. It was in April of 1999. It was in the time of NATO's aggression against Serbia. 16 media workers were killed on site. None of them were journalists, but they were people who work for a TV station, crew guys, camera guys, cable guys, and whatever. Jamie Shea was, first of all, of course, nobody answered for that crime. Jamie Shea was the spokesperson of the NATO at the moment. He was bragging about the bombing of Serbian broadcasting company. And, of course, he never answered for that. Nobody from the NATO ever answered for that. But the main point is that even if nobody was in the building, even if there were no victims, it would still be a crime. Bombing a TV station should be a crime. Bombing a YouTube channel should be a crime. Mm-hmm. Blocking financial, blocking money from a YouTube channel or from an alternative media should be a crime. If there is no viable reason, and I don't see what viable reason could be for that, we, I think, effectively have to come up with mechanisms to hurt those who hurt journalism. And we can only do that by doing what we are already doing by journalism. We have to focus our attention. If somebody is attempting making attempts at lives of journalists, as your friend and colleague Adrian can speak about, his example is the best one. We should direct our journalism, our effort, our professional efforts at those who are possibly behind that attempt. Because let's face it, it's not about 2 or 3 thugs who came up to the idea to hurt him. It was possibly organized. We have to use our channels, our associates, our knowledge, our experience to direct our professional criticism, whatever we can, against those who possibly hurt journalism one way or another, either physically, as in Adrian's case, or financially or logistically, as they do in other cases. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Miodrag. I was thinking about Matt because Matt Egger is the founder of the Free Thought Project. He just texted me that there is a storm in the US at his state, and his power went off. So I'm hoping he can join us. And while he is struggling with the Mother Nature, I would like to hear Deborah Armstrong is an independent journalist from the United States.
Thank you for having me here. I guess I feel sort of outclassed in the sense that I haven't been yet in the kind of danger that so many of you have been. I'm not yet added to the Mirotvorets list, I assume, because I don't have that many followers yet. And it's still legal, although it's not really liked, but it's legal for me to write what I want to write in the United States. Like my bank account hasn't been closed. I haven't had my life threatened. That, of course, will change if I go to the Donbass. The main thing that happens here for me has been censorship. I'm a freelance journalist, so I do my main portion of my writing on Medium and Substack, and Medium has put warnings on some of my articles, which people in other countries have told me that they see. And then, of course, I get banned constantly on social media. I've lost track of how many times I've been banned on Facebook, but they constantly do that. And the last time they banned me, it was for something I didn't even post, that they sent me a picture of this post about something about Trump and his voters that I did not post. And there's no way to link to it. Like they didn't provide any way to click on that to find out what post they were even talking about. So they just arbitrarily ban people. And for example, Regis Tremblay had thousands upon thousands of hours of videos on YouTube, and all of that was deleted. They completely deleted his account. And he's tried to get it back, and they aren't doing it. So now he's trying to slowly upload his work onto Rumble and other places. Then you've got Scott Ritter, who had this on again, off again thing with Twitter, I guess, with the Elon Musk thing that went on. They they put him back on Twitter for one day, and then he got removed again from Twitter with no reason given at all. Same thing with Regis Tremblay. And he's also getting, Scott Ritter is also getting harassed by NAFO, the NAFO trolls, which are just horrible, horrible trolls, which go after you and smear you online and attack, and they try to get you shut down. And just the other day, Diane Sayre, she was a senatorial candidate here who was recently ran against Chuck Schumer, and she's running again. She showed up at a breakfast meeting that he was having with a bullhorn and took him to task on Miro Torriets. And he just laughed her off. Everybody there just laughed at her because they don't even know what Miro Torriets is, this kill list from Ukraine. They don't believe it. They just call it propaganda, and they laughed at her. And, oh, Diane, ha, ha, ha. Like it was just a joke. And I've written articles about this, and thousands of people on this list, including more than 300 children, almost 400 children. And, they're laughing at this. And I just can't, it's very hard for me to wrap my mind around the kind of people that just laugh at something like that and aren't listening. And I guess I used to work in television news and local news, and I've mixed a few times with network people. And my takeaway from it was the higher up I got in the business, the more cutthroat it really was. And the kinds of people that seemed to go places, at least in the US in television news, were the most shallow, social climbing people that were there. Instead of the thinkers, instead of the critical thinkers, it seemed like it was the more shallow people. And my theory for that is that they're the most easily controlled by the psychopaths. Because all they really care about is being famous and making money, and they don't really care about facts. And that's why they're so fine with doing propaganda, I guess, and just using CIA people as experts on their shows, and instead of actually getting the truth. I mean, I tried to contact a photographer I used to work with that I won a couple of Emmy Awards with, and he's just, laughed at me for what I'm covering now, because to him is just, they aren't even taking it seriously. And you just get called a propagandist. But so far, I haven't been in any real physical danger. It's just the censorship that's going on. And as to what we can do about that, I don't know. I mean, I can barely even get my stories seen. So I'm lucky if I get people to pick up my articles and share them. But it just, the censorship is crazy here. It's absolutely insane. And they're just censoring everybody. Just ordinary people post about this stuff on Facebook. They're getting banned and called Russian propagandists. And I guess that's all I really have to say.
Thank you, Deborah. It was good to hear from you. And now I would like to introduce to some of you who doesn't know him yet. He's here in the studio with me, Mike Jones, independent journalist who represents UK Today. And the board is yours, Mike.
Thank you very much indeed. Excuse me. And thank you for those speeches and stories that you guys have given us. Quite eye-opening for me, a bit like Deborah's kind of highlighted. I haven't suffered quite the same level of attacks and retribution from, be it the governments, be it from other actors and operators. Thankfully, I've not been sanctioned by my government in the case of my countryman Graham Phillips, who is actually quite a landmark case, and I would like to bring some attention to his case, which I'm sure many of the people on this forum today are aware of. But for me, this is quite a landmark case for Graham Phillips, whereby the government of the United Kingdom has effectively declared a form of war against their own citizen by sanctioning him for nothing more than journalism. which I agree with that point that journalism itself must be protected. When it comes to censorship as well, I operate primarily in the video sphere, and that primary platform being YouTube, where I've danced around the censorship, but luckily I've survived thus far to grow an audience of about 100,000 subscribers. And they are themselves very much aware and often tell me of censorship on Twitter, Facebook, for when they share my videos outside of the space. So I'm also aware of these cases of these physical attacks. A colleague of mine, John Mark Dugan, who is a US citizen currently here in Russia on political asylum, he interviewed Adrian, the French citizen who was attacked, on his YouTube channel. So John as well is very familiar with what it's like to be targeted by your own government. John being one of the people who blew the whistle. I think he was involved in the Epstein and a few others. He set up a whistleblowing website. So John Mark Dugan is another case of certainly a government that quite openly starts to target its own civilian when they step out of line and do something that doesn't follow their narrative that they wish to be presented. I've just been to Donbass and come back. Again, I don't think yet that I've even made it to the Mirotvorets list. It's not really something I'm aiming for, but I do see it as kind of a mark of recognition for all of your guys' work in bringing the truth on behalf of the people of Donbass to what I am seeing as being a growing Western audience. I can say that from personal experience, but I do see it across other channels as well, where the people in the West are seeing the behavior of the governments and are crying out against it, or at least expressing their dissatisfaction. And they're coming to alternative media sources, if we can call ourselves that, to both share their experiences and express their support, which I find encouraging. I'm also very encouraged by the Russian Foreign Ministry's letters and their stance in supporting journalists and assisting. The other point I'd like to make with the Western audience is I think there was a case in Gaza Strip where Blinken, State Secretary there, really showed the world the attitude of certainly the US government as well, when I do forgive me, I forget her name. There was a journalist who was killed there, a female journalist, and the United States in action. So I agree with Mira in this stated goal that there does need to be an independent platform that can really lobby and do the utmost to bring people to justice, not just individuals, but in fact governments, Israel, who have perpetrated some of these crimes against journalism and journalists. And obviously I mentioned them, but I don't just single them out as being the only ones. So thank you very much for having me here. Again, like Deborah, I feel a little bit of imposter syndrome, but I hope highlighting these cases also strengthens the need and helps highlight to other people just how bad things have gotten in the world today.
Thank you, Mike. I think you and Deborah are very humble people, because Deborah does an incredible job there in the US, actually bringing the truth to the Western public, to the United States, and she participated in many conferences and forums and different other events that were organized by Schiller Institute and many others. So do you, Mike, you for the past couple of months been to Donbass? I think you moved there already. You brought just wonderful humanitarian aid. You organized the real Christmas for Donbass children. You and John Mark Dugan, that was mentioned earlier today here. Thank you for everything that you're doing. And I would like to see if you guys have any questions or subjects to discuss and between each other and bring up.
Not from me, really. I think the guys did a really good job of covering many of the aspects and topics that I've seen. But again, if anyone would like to volunteer anything.
All right. It seems Matt still was not able to win over the nature He was trying to get in only with audio, without the video, but I guess nature is winning, and Eva Bartlett is battling with technologies with her laptop. So hopefully by the end of today's forum, maybe we will hear one of them. But so far, what I have to offer for all of you and some other our colleagues who was not able to join today, but probably will join our intentions, I guess, good intentions. As I see the situation right now, the International Federation of Journalists that is located in the United States, that I wrote to several times, and I never got a response or any attention back or anything. I see that we need to approach other NGOs worldwide in different countries who are actually standing for not only journalist safety, but as Mia Drag said, journalism protection, because journalism as a profession is about to be gone as dinosaurs back in the day, because what is happening with freedom of speech is just scary nowadays. And we can approach those NGOs and offer them to become an international journalist union. And as one big group, we can approach world leaders and see which countries are ready to stand up, to actually do stand up for freedom of speech and safety of journalists, and unite like that and support like that with the government's support as well. It's would that be BRICS countries? Would that be other countries? Because I know there are many other countries outside of BRICS that would like to support this initiative, who does believe in freedom of speech and who supports right morals, principles, and traditions.
Well, I think you should approach what they call the friendly countries,
Right.
because I think when you approach countries in Western Europe like France, the Netherlands, Belgium, Germany, I think there are people, of course, in these countries who are opposing their government, but I don't think NGOs will stand up for that, because they, as soon as they speak out about Russia, and especially I can only speak about the Netherlands, but if you speak out about Russia and you prove about a special military operation, well, they will be kicked off from their jobs or something. So I think mainly friendly countries like in the Middle East or Africa, Latin American countries. I think, that is my opinion.
Yeah. Today, we all actually represent different countries, and each of us could monitor the NGOs that work with the protection of journalists' rights, and we could see which of our countries and other countries, of course, do have those NGOs who truly protects, who truly works, who truly stands for those rights. And we should unite with those NGOs and already all together approach the governments of those countries who also supports freedom of speech, journalism, safety, the rights to life, the basic human rights. And this is those the rights to freedom, those rights that are being brutally taken from us on a daily basis, unfortunately, by the Western hegemony.
Yeah, it's also taken there.
I think really Sonia is right. I see now that there is a huge development in terms of journalism and media awareness, especially in Africa. I see now they are in Africa creating a lot of new independent media, and they are really trying to get in touch really and to understand all the big geopolitical issues and to invite independent journalists like us. So I think we should first work with these countries where there is less problem of interference from the authorities in the journalistic work.
Thank you, Christelle. So let's do that then. We've got a lot of work to do. I would like to thank you everyone for coming and participating in our first this year journalist forum, and we will move on with our initiative, and hopefully soon our family will grow bigger to the International Journalists Union. And thank you everyone who stayed with us today. Счастливого крещения всем православным, and we will see you later, guys. Nice day.